Welcome to Maximus Live, episode 56. Can't believe we've done so many of these shows all throughout last year and this year. Welcome everyone who's joining us on Clubhouse, Discord, Instagram, and the many other channels in which we are streaming. My name is Dr. Cam Sapa. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and professor of psychiatry at the UCSF School of Medicine. I have a background in mental health, but also mind-body medicine. And so today's show is about maximizing your testosterone because my company, Maximus, does men's health and hormone optimization. If you're interested, check us out at MaximusTribe.com. We have a very safe and effective program that can double your testosterone levels using a revolutionary oral prescription medication pill and supplement regimen that works as well as testosterone replacement therapy, but without the injections, infertility, and dependence of TRT. It is fantastic. We have several hundred patients that are on it with incredible results because we prove that it works with before and after at-home lab tests. So we measure your testosterone levels, increase it, and then prove it by sending it to a third-party lab. If you're interested, like I mentioned, check us out at MaximusTribe.com. But the topic of the radio show is broader than that. We can obviously talk all about hormone optimization for men, but given my background and also the protocol of our program, we also talk about nutrition, sleep, physical activity and exercise, focus, and relationships, since all of those are important not just for optimal hormones, but for optimal holistic or overall health as well. So we like to do this in a call-in radio show format. You can raise your hand if you're on Clubhouse and kind of an ask me anything if you're familiar with sort of the Reddit format. If you have a particular problem, I love to coach people through it live. If you ever watched Dr. Drew's radio show, if you are on YouTube, just type in your question and Victor, my great social media manager, will read the question and then I'll answer it. Every week we like to start out with what I call a weekly unpopular opinion, just to get the flow going and talk a little bit about the scientific literature about a practical and applicable tip that you can use in your everyday life. So this week's unpopular opinion is that pre and post-workout carbohydrates are overrated. So if you have been involved in the fitness or bodybuilding community, you probably have heard about the importance of pre or post-workout carbs. In fact, most of the formulas that have been promoted by the supplement industry often include a lot of carbohydrates under this notion that there's this magical 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein that you should consume after a workout in order to replenish your glycogen stores. In fact, the original MetRx protein supplement, if folks remember that way back, I think it goes back to the early 90s, that the great Dorian Yates used, was a 2-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein. There's in fact been a lot of studies that show that chocolate milk, which naturally has that ratio of carbohydrates to protein, is also a great kind of post-workout supplement. But the good news is there's been a lot of research that's been done since then to really test this notion of is it necessary or not. And I thought there was a couple of interesting findings from the scientific literature that were very, very informative. So the first is this idea of glycogen. So a lot of people may have heard this term but may not know exactly what it is. Glycogen is essentially the how carbohydrates are stored in your liver. And so your body essentially has, if you will, think about it like a store or a reservoir of glycogen that it can use in order to provide energy for your body when you're working out. Now, there's been lots of studies that measure essentially glycogen depletion, meaning when you work out, how much of your glycogen do you use? And the interesting thing is, unlike endurance sports where you're working out for over an hour, doing like a marathon or something like that, most people are lifting weights on the order of, 30 to 75 minutes realistically in terms of lifting weights at the gym. Even when they're doing very high intensity weightlifting, meaning that you're going every set to failure, meaning you can't do another rep. And there's been studies where they have guys do 9, even 15 sets of heavy leg work. That's usually like the most difficult type of exercise to do. They only find that glycogen depletes by about 20 to 30%. So it's not like you're running out of fuel even when you're doing a really, really intense workout. So that's fact number one. Fact number two that's really interesting is that even when you deplete your glycogen by 20-30%, the body is very good at replenishing it. So even when you don't eat anything after a workout, the body is able, through various cycles of its own, I believe the Cori cycle, is able to replenish glycogen on its own. And so the notion that you absolutely need to consume carbohydrates in the form of sugar or starches to replenish your glycogen is not very evidence-based in terms of the scientific literature, because A, it doesn't go down that much in the first place, and B, it naturally gets fixed on its own. And so I actually think there's not a lot of scientific evidence to support the idea that you really need carbohydrates either before or after your workout, as long as you're eating a reasonable diet. Now, there's two things that I should add to that. The one exception to this is if you are on a ketogenic diet or you're fasting very heavily. So if you're on a ketogenic diet, you are by definition not consuming very much carbohydrates, usually less than 50 grams or less than 30 grams of net carbohydrates per day. In that case, that is not optimal for weightlifting. There's very few ketogenic weightlifters. And the folks that do it with that, like the Keto Gains community, for instance, does recommend what's called targeted ketogenic. Oh, sorry, got a little bit of echo going. Do you have a diet in which they're consuming about 15 grams of a fast-acting sugar like a glucose or dextrose? For example, honey. My favorite two sources are Manuka Honey, which is a very medicinal honey that comes from New Zealand, or black garlic. It's basically garlic cloves that have been fermented and naturally, essentially caramelized. They taste actually sweet. It doesn't taste like garlic at all. It doesn't have actually the garlic flavor. So those are two great sources of carbohydrates to consume right before your workout. I recommend doing it within 30 minutes of your workout so that it can absorb into your bloodstream and give you enough energy to get through your workout if you're keto or low carb. But honestly, most people, even when they're doing keto, aren't truly in ketosis. So very few people, I would argue, need it unless you're literally counting your carbs and you're absolutely sure that you're below 30 to 50 grams. But honestly, that probably applies to less than 5% of people who are listening to this show. So the much more important tip that I recommend to people is make sure that you're getting pre or post-workout protein. There are numerous scientific studies that show that protein is absolutely critical for muscle protein synthesis in terms of building muscle, which is what both men and women want to do when they're weightlifting. And so my general recommendation, I actually do like protein powders. Whey protein isolate or whey protein concentrate are the most bioavailable. Don't fall for all the plant protein nonsense that's been promoted. Pea protein and other forms, soy protein, are never as bioavailable or as good as animal-based protein. If you're lactose intolerant, you should consume whey protein isolate. It's been refined, and so it's lacking in lactose. Or you can try goat-based whey protein, which is closer actually to human milk than cow milk is, more easily digested, lower in lactose. Those are really good choices, and a lot of people don't like to obviously work out on a heavy stomach. Having a protein shake right before your workout allows you to have that protein without weighing yourself down, pun intended. Or you can have it post-workout as well. I prefer it as a pre-workout because I don't like to eat right before a workout. But after a workout, the best source of protein is just real food. The best thing to do is just eat a nice meal when you get home from the gym. It doesn't have to be within a magical 30-minute, post-workout nutrient timing window. I think that's been debunked as well. So the moral of the story for this week's Unpopular Opinion is don't stress so much about pre or post-workout carbs. There's no strong evidence that it's necessary for glycogen replenishment unless you're on a ketogenic diet, and then you can consume approximately 15 grams right before a workout. Recommended sources are Manuka Honey or black garlic, because there's additional benefits that come from those things as opposed to consuming pure glucose or like a Gatorade. Rather than that, try to consume 20 to 30 grams of protein pre or post workout in the form of a whey protein being the most bioavailable source. So that's this week's Unpopular Opinion and tip. If anyone has any questions on diet, exercise, sleep, focus, or relationships, please raise your hand here on Clubhouse. Or if there's any questions that are coming in on the YouTube, Victor can ask those. Otherwise, we'll get to questions from last week.
We had a question via YouTube. Do you think tap water is safe? Should I filter my water, or is that nothing to worry about?
Yeah, it's a great question. It also depends on where you are. Unfortunately, the quality of tap water varies quite a bit based on the location. If you're based in the United States, it's obviously much safer than in a lot of other countries in which they don't have access to necessarily clean drinking water. So it depends on what you mean by safe. The U.S. actually has like kind of stringent standards when it comes to water quality. So it's relatively safe in the sense that you're not going to get generally like a waterborne disease that requires like an antibiotic in order to cure yourself of it, right? We don't have that kind of issues here in the United States, fortunately. Generally speaking, yes, it's safe in terms of like regular consumption and the prevention of disease. Now, the a little bit of a higher standard though, is it optimal for health? No, not necessarily, because as we've talked about a lot of times, one of the major disruptors of our hormones and testosterone are these endocrine disrupting chemicals, particularly the xenoestrogens or synthetic estrogens that do come in our drinking water, plastics, and processed foods. So, if you want to minimize your exposure to those xenoestrogens, it is wise to filter your water. You can go obviously as simple as a Brita filter, a very basic sort of charcoal based filter. A step up from that, though, would be to use a reverse osmosis based filter, which uses pressure and is the higher grade of filter. A lot of the machines that you see outside of your local grocery store that dispense gallons of water for like 25 cents a gallon, those actually typically use reverse osmosis, if not a combination of reverse osmosis, UV, and charcoal filters for taste. So those are great systems. If you have a house, it costs a couple $100, but I think long term for your family's health, it is useful to install a reverse osmosis system, and that is the kind of the gold standard, so to speak, in terms of water filtration. So yeah, generally safe, but if you want to go like a step beyond, if you will, go above and beyond, then installing a filtration system or using a filtered water is probably a better bet.
We had another question via YouTube. What is the timeline for symptomatic relief with Clomiphene?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So the viewer was asking, what's the timeline for symptomatic relief when it comes to enclomiphene? So let me first explain what enclomiphene is for the viewers who are not familiar with it. Enclomiphene is one of the main compounds that we use as part of the Maximus King Protocol. It's really a revolutionary drug because it's one of the only ways by taking a pill that you can safely increase your testosterone levels. So testosterone itself is a fat-soluble compound, and so it's not very orally bioavailable. There is no testosterone pill, even though there are oral steroids that mimic testosterone, they actually damage the liver. Essentially, any sort of oral steroid, typically speaking, is harmful to the liver. So there hasn't been to date, essentially, an FDA-approved oral form of testosterone, and the oral steroids have their own problems as well. Enclomiphene is not a steroid. It's not testosterone. It's actually a SERM, which is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. All that is a very fancy term for saying it blocks estrogen receptors in specific places, including the brain. When it does that, the brain thinks, oh, I'm not getting enough estrogen and I need to produce more. And how does it produce more estrogen? By producing more testosterone, because estrogen is derived from testosterone. And so it's actually a very clever hack, if you will, in that it gets your body, it gets your brain specifically, to think there's an estrogen shortage. It increases your LH, your luteinizing hormone, and FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone, which stimulates your testes, where the word testosterone comes from, to produce more of its own testosterone. It also produces more sperm. And so originally, enclomiphene comes from a fertility drug, which is used in both women and off-label in men to increase fertility. Enclomiphene is revolutionary because it's a purified form of clomiphene. It lacks the zuclomiphene isomer in clomiphene, which has been around since 1976, which really acts as an estrogen, causes emotional side effects, messes with libido, etc. But enclomiphene, being the purified form, stimulates LH and FSH production, increases testosterone by 1.5 to 2.5x, usually doubling people's testosterone levels. And to your question, the half-life is 10 and a half hours. In fact, when you take a dose, like a pill of Clomiphene, you can actually feel the effects within 30 to 60 minutes. If you look at the pharmacokinetics, meaning if you look at how it behaves in your body, you get a nice spike in terms of Clomiphene levels and testosterone that happens immediately, and then it lasts for about 10 and a half hours. So if you take it in the morning, it will basically last most of the day, and a half-life means basically 50% of it comes out of your system by then. So generally you can feel it immediately, but I always tell people it's not a psychoactive drug. It's not like taking caffeine where you drink it and you get a jolt in that way, and that doesn't work directly on the brain. It increases a hormone that affects both mind and body. And so it's a much more subtle effect. It's more like a calm sort of energy. Some people do obviously report feeling it immediately if they're a little bit more attuned to sort of how their body feels. But generally, I would say, you feel it within the first hour, first day. But it typically takes about a week to achieve what are called serum saturation levels, meaning that if you wanted to test your testosterone and see if it's going up, generally you want to give it at least a week for the levels to sort of build up in your system and achieve a steady state where you can say reliably what the effects are. So you can see a pretty pronounced increase in testosterone within a week, although there are studies that show that the peak levels peak at about day 28. So it will go up from week 1 to week 4, basically. And so if you want to measure essentially your maximal peak testosterone levels, you want to wait about a month. And that's exactly why, as part of the Maximus Protocol, we test people right before they start the program, right before they start their medication, and then 30 days after, so that we can capture that peak level of testosterone. Now, your specific question was not asking about the testosterone increase, but about symptomatic relief, which is how long is it going to take for me to feel better? And Victor and I actually just recorded a podcast today with Dr. Rand McClain. He talked about sort of the three main symptoms of low testosterone, which are low energy, number one. Number two is low sex drive or libido. And then number three is sort of like a low general sense of well-being in terms of your mood. Sometimes that manifests as symptoms of depression and anxiety. And an additional one is difficulty with body recomposition, meaning you're going to the gym, but you're having difficulty putting on muscle. You kind of have extra belly fat. That can also be a symptom of sort of low testosterone. So those are the four most common symptoms people report when they have sort of low testosterone. And some of these things, so I'll go through one by one. How quickly can you feel the benefits? The energy benefits, like I said, within the first day to the first week, you'll notice it. But like I said, it's a subtle energy. And a better way of describing it is, if you're not getting a jolt of energy like caffeine, you probably don't even want that anyway, because caffeine and most stimulants, they bring you up and then they crash you down, right? It doesn't last in a sustainable way. And Clomiphene produces more of a calm energy. In fact, I can't even consume caffeine or stimulants. It makes me really anxious, makes me sweaty, increases my blood pressure. It's not good for me. I'm a hyper responder. I'm really sensitive to any sort of stimulant, and I can't really touch it. It'll mess with my sleep as well. But within Clomiphene, the thing that I notice is I don't get that post-afternoon slump in terms of a lot of people feel tired after they consume lunch, particularly a high carbohydrate lunch, as we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast. And so you don't get that like, I absolutely need to take a nap kind of feeling, or I need that second cup of coffee in the afternoon feeling, because your energy levels are naturally higher. So like I said, within the first day to the first week, you'll find that benefit. In terms of the libido effects, 75% of people who take a SERM find improvement in terms of sexual function. So for those people, you'll also probably notice that within the first day to the first week. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Libido is one of those things where it's not just physiological, it's a psychological element as well. Obviously, like who your partner is, your relationship with that partner, and also stress is the number one killer of sex drive and libido, in addition to decreasing testosterone. But the libido is almost like exquisitely sensitive to stress. If you're even like moderately stressed, it can really be a boner killer, as the non-clinical term is. And so you want to be aware of that as well. It's not just a Clomiphene or testosterone phenomenon, but you have to make sure you're managing your stress as well. That's why we actually do behavioral counseling as part of our program. We're not just throwing medications at people, but we help people with stress management. And obviously diet, exercise, sleep, all of those things help manage stress in the form of lowering cortisol. The third benefit in terms of the mood, we do actually find symptomatic improvements in depression and anxiety because we use a PHQ, an evidence-based questionnaire, between the baseline and 30 days of doing the program. So people do tend to feel better. Again, you can probably notice that within a day to a week, but we definitely by day 30 no improvements in mood. The body recomposition effects, however, do take longer. You don't magically burn body fat and put on muscle just by taking Clomiphene. Now, there is published research that shows that this class of medication can help you put on 5 pounds of lean mass in 12 weeks, which is actually pretty remarkable. So if you think about it like that, you really want to give it 90 days or about 12 weeks to see the effects on your body. And in particular, you need to obviously couple that with going to the gym at least 3 to 5 times a week, because testosterone doesn't just work by itself. You want to give your muscles stress and stimulus in order to grow. And same thing, you're not going to magically lose body fat if you're shoving cookies down your face. You got to obviously eat a whole food, unprocessed diet, which will help you do. I wrote a whole book on maximizing your testosterone and the 5 health behaviors: diet, exercise, sleep, focus, and accountability that help you do it. You can actually download it for free. It's at MaximusTribe.com. If you put your email on our mailing list, we can give you a link so you can download the book for free. But if you want the coaching to go through that as part of our program, you can obviously sign up for our program. We're available in 13 U.S. states right now, which covers 40% of the U.S. population, including California and Florida, our biggest states. You can check out which states we cover on our website as well. So that's the long answer to your question about how long it takes to notice the symptomatic relief benefits of Clomiphene.
When will the Maximus King Protocol be available in Illinois?
Yeah, great question. I actually did my fellowship in Illinois at one of the Chicago VA hospitals. So Chicago and Illinois are near and dear to my heart. We actually do have physicians that are licensed there. We're just getting set up there. So hopefully soon. I don't have a definitive date for you, but I would say in the next couple months, we should be good to go. Obviously, Illinois is one of the most populous states in the country, so it's very high on our list. So I will tell you that in terms of the next few states that we roll out to, Illinois is going to be very, very soon. And having practiced actually in Illinois, I definitely want to serve the residents of that state in the greater Chicagoland area as soon as possible.
We had this question last week, didn't have time to get to it. Vitamin E and A use good and bad, have good and bad qualities to it. I have heard that too much vitamin E or too much vitamin A can actually be cancerous. Can you please explain?
Yeah, great question. So there's a question about vitamin A and vitamin E supplementation, and can it have deleterious or harmful effects, particularly when it comes to being carcinogenic or cancer causing? So it's a great question. And the simple answer to your question is it depends on what forms. There is not one thing called vitamin A, and there's not one thing called vitamin E. So let's start with vitamin A. There's actually multiple forms of vitamin A. The most common form is a form called retinol palmitate. That's actually the form that we use in our over-the-counter supplement. And there's also beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is the natural plant-based form that's found in fruits and vegetables. It's generally, if you're consuming it in the form of fruits and vegetables, very hard to overdose on vitamin A. I've never heard of that happening. If you're taking it in supplement form, it is possible, but it's relatively rare. However, if you're consuming the animal-based form of vitamin A, or the supplement form equivalent of it, which is vitamin A palmitate, it is possible to overdose on it. There's interesting stories of Arctic explorers, in fact, that hunted polar bears. And polar bears, for some reason, have very high levels of vitamin A in their liver. And liver is actually like the most nutritious part of the animal. It's like nature's multivitamin, but you can actually have too much of a good thing. So there's actually reported cases of vitamin A poisoning from consuming excess polar bear liver. Now, most of you are not eating polar bear liver, But if you are consuming a lot of liver, in terms of beef liver, chicken liver, etc., like you're consuming it literally every day in large quantities, some of these carnivore folks do that, you may want to be careful about vitamin A overdose. That's why grandma back in the day, when she was cooking your liver, you generally have it once a week. Now, I don't think they understood the science of it. I think literally just through traditional Lindy trial and error, they kind of figured out that liver makes you healthier, and once a week is enough, and not any more than that. So that's generally what I recommend. A normal portion size of liver, like once a week, is probably really beneficial for you. And then same thing, if you're taking it in supplement form, we give people about 3,000 IUs of vitamin A in terms of retinol palmitate. That's pretty close to the upper tolerable limit, or what's called the UTI, and no relation to urinary tract infections. But that basically is the safe amount that you can consume on a daily basis without knocking you into a vitamin A sort of toxicity range. Now, vitamin A is really beneficial for numerous reasons. We talk about this actually on our website. If you're interested in reading more, you can go to maximustribe.com/science. And if you scroll down after we talk about Clomiphene, I actually talk about the benefits of some of these supplements, including vitamin A. Vitamin A actually is part of these sort of lipid-soluble vitamins or fat-soluble vitamins that regulate a number of genes and body functions, including testicular function and sperm production. So if you have a deficiency in vitamin A, actually prevent your testosterone from being released in normal amounts. If you're really interested in vitamin A, I actually recommend our article by Dr. Chris Masterjohn. It's called Vitamin A, the Forgotten Bodybuilding Nutrient. And he talks about basically how important vitamin A is to muscle building and is one of the most potent weapons in a bodybuilder's arsenal. So it's really important for the utilization of protein, production of testosterone. And so that's why we include it in our supplement. But yes, you don't want to take too much. The other question that you asked about was vitamin E, which also in studies have been shown to have sort of deleterious effects. But that's because there's actually 8 forms of vitamin E. There are 4 forms that are called the tocopherols, and then there's 4 forms that are the tocotrienols. The tocotrienols are smaller, they're more active, they're more potent in terms of being free radical scavengers, in terms of their antioxidant capacity. If you're really interested in this topic, we had a whole podcast from the guy who's literally the world's expert on vitamin E, who discovered, in fact, the tocotrienol forms, Dr. Barry Tan. You can check us out. Our YouTube channel is Maximus Tribe. He talks about these tocotrienol forms. In fact, he patented a version of this called Delta Gold. It's 90% delta tocotrienol, 10% gamma tocotrienol. We include 100 milligrams of it in our over-the-counter supplement. And he actually mentions how it's very potent, like I said, as an antioxidant. It's really critical for fertility. It's been long known for over 100 years that vitamin E is critical for fertility production and is involved in the HPG's axis production of LH, which is the hormone that stimulates testosterone, and FSH, which stimulates sperm production. And so there's studies that specifically show that this specific form that we use of tocotrienols has a synergistic effect with SERMs, the selective estrogen receptor modulators that we use, such as in Clomiphene. And so I don't recommend that people take too much vitamin A. I don't recommend actually people take tocopherol, which is like the form of vitamin E that's in almost every supplement or multivitamin. Rather than that, I recommend, if you're going to take it, take the form that we use in our supplement, which is the tocotrienol form, since it does seem to be superior and not be associated with some of the adverse effects that the tocopherol forms have been associated with in previous studies. All right, looks like we got someone on Clubhouse. If you have a question, feel free to... Hi, Sri. How you doing?
Good. So I have a question about honey. So you mentioned about Manuka honey,
Yep.
right? That triggered a question in my mind. So what is a good honey? I understand that in the grocery stores that we see with the gummy bear kind of bottles, There's that kind of a honey, there is a raw honey, there is the organic honey, there is a wildflower honey, and so on. And there is a recommendation that buy a bottle of honey, which you can find it in the farmer's market, is one thing. Or, you can go to any of these wholesale stores and get a Nate's honey, which has great ratings on Amazon and Sam's Club and all that. And but there has been a lot of other rumors about how adulterated honey is in general, and the testing that they undergo, only very few companies go through that, NMR testing or something like that, to find out if the honey is really pure or not. So I was just curious. You mentioned about Manuka honey, but
Right.
do you have any more information than what I just gathered here?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually a national tragedy that we literally have adulterated food. I always tell people most of the olive oil that you buy is not olive oil at all, or it's highly adulterated. Literally, there's a lot of companies that scam people because you don't, until you read the label on the back of the bottle, it'll literally say it's a mixture of olive oil and canola oil, for instance. There's unfortunately a lot of olive oil that's imported from Italy is literally diluted without labeling, and you can't tell the difference because maybe it's like 50% olive oil, 50% canola, and they just add a little bit of a pepper or spices to mimic the spiciness of true olive oil. So yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of fake olive oil. There's a lot of fake honey that's out there. So the best thing you can do is obviously buy from reliable brands and sources. If it's too cheap to be true, it probably is. But I will tell you that Trader Joe's and Costco in particular have pretty good quality assurance and testing programs. I know their olive oil in particular has been tested by Consumer Reports, and it always comes up as genuine. And so I generally trust those wholesalers. I assume if their olive oil is good, their honey is probably legit as well. So that's one thing. Obviously, if you buy local as well from a farmer's market, you know where it's coming from. You can talk to the farmer. Less likely to be, fraudulent. So buy from reliable stores, buy from reliable brands. It's probably worth the extra money. I will say Manuka honey is a really great example of this, in which, because of all the buzz, pun intended, about Manuka honey, if you go on Amazon and try to buy it, there's a lot of fake Manuka honey brands, or like the UMF ratings, which is a rating of the potency of the Manuka honey, is often exaggerated. And so I don't really trust, quite frankly, any brand I buy on Amazon in terms of legit Manuka honey. I buy mine from Costco because I know Costco verifies, almost all of their vendors. So it's very highly likely to be legit. So that's the number one thing I would say, is just make sure you're buying it from a place that's generally has high quality standards and is less likely to leak the fake stuff through. So that's number one. Number two, it depends on what the purpose is that you're using the honey for. Manuka honey is known as sort of like the medicinal honey. Now, I think a lot of the claims around Manuka honey are quite frankly exaggerated, or it's like, well, is it helpful for healing wounds and burns? Yeah, maybe, but I worked in a hospital burn unit. We weren't slathering honey on it. We were using medicinal, like pharmaceutical products. Sure, if you're out in the wild or something and the only thing you have is honey, you can use it, but I think using just standard Neosporin and other kind of vetted products are probably the way to go. The reason I like Manuka honey, though, is it is a very high quality honey. It quite frankly tastes better. It's like the equivalent of ghee compared to some shitty grocery store butter. It's very thick. It's very flavorful. It's very robust. It just feels better, to be honest with you. I don't know if I'm getting any additional medicinal purpose from it, but it's just a very high quality. It's very clearly, obviously, a high quality honey. And so if you're, taking it for that reason and you just want a very high quality food source, I recommend it for that reason. Now, if you are consuming honey for allergy reasons, then you want to actually use a different type of honey. What's really interesting is there does seem to be some research and also some anecdotal evidence that consuming locally sourced raw honey may help people with their allergens. And the theory behind this actually kind of makes common sense, which is if you're allergic to the local sort of pollens in particular in your environment, obviously, honey is produced by honeybees that are in contact with those pollens. And so if you think about it, consuming honey that is from bees that are in contact with local pollens is almost a form of microdosing of those pollens, which is essentially a form of exposure therapy where you're putting very tiny micro doses of those pollens and you're consuming it every day. So some folks anecdotally talk about if they have sort of pollen-based allergies, they consume a local honey and preferably raw. Obviously, don't feed your baby that. That's toxic to babies, but adults can handle generally raw honey pretty well. Make sure that its constituents aren't denatured. That kind of locally sourced honey, which you can get from a local store or local farmer's market, will have the local sort of allergens in your area and are better for that. That's why you don't want to consume something from New Zealand or Australia. The type of pollen or the type of flower that Manuka honey is from is definitely not in your neighborhood, and so it's not going to do anything on that front. So that's my answer to your question. Is it depends on what you're using the honey for. Now, if you're just like using it to sweeten a drink, you can probably use like whatever cheap honeys in that plastic bear that's in every store, because at that point you're just using it as a glucose source. But like I said, if you're using it for allergens, you're using it for pre-workout, you just want a really high quality source, then you're going to choose different types of honey for the purpose that you're selecting it for.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily workout, but in general, I have a question about twitching, body twitches that people get. I don't know if enough has been discussed about this because generally it's a very minor irritant when something twitches because of lack of sleep or muscle fatigue or whatever. But I'm reading in general, and there have been quite a few articles and nowadays videos as well on YouTube. They're just flaunting the twitches for 10 seconds or whatever in different parts of the body or something. So when is it just a minor irritant versus when is it like it's happening so continuously on a daily basis, just for a few seconds here and there, but it is not going away for many days actually. It's like a part of you. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. You're talking about something acute versus chronic. If it's acute, it's hard to, it's probably not worrisome that happens every once in a while. If you are talking about a chronic sort of daily thing, the question to me, as a clinician is always, I always ask about distress and impairment, which is it bothering you? That's the distress. Like if it's kind of causing a lot of, annoyance or frustration, that's when you may want to get something, checked out. And second, is it causing any impairment? Like you're sitting there and you're doing a Zoom call and you're like twitching and, it looks off. Then clearly you want to go do something about it. Now, twitching is, you can't just from that symptom understand what the etiology of that is. That's not my expertise anyway. But I will say that it can commonly be secondary to a host of conditions. So some people, obviously, with chronic stress or anxiety, do have some sort of twitching that happens. Not all the time or commonly, but sometimes for some people it does manifest in that way. So that's the first thing I would try to figure out is like, okay, do you have high stress or anxiety, or does it seem to be exacerbated by stress or anxiety? Is there anything that's triggering it? So, usually when you have a symptom, you want to like track or log it. And I would have a patient for a week, if they're unaware of what's causing it, be like, what's going on in your life? Like every time it happens, did you just work out? Did you just eat? What happened in like the time immediately preceding it? That maybe you can figure out if there's a stimulus that's causing it versus something that's, I don't know, perhaps completely random. So that's the second thing that's sort of worth exploring. Obviously, there are more complicated psychiatric and neurological factors. Sometimes folks who are on the Tourette's syndrome spectrum obviously have very obvious facial twitches, but that's a very different thing than if you're talking about like a muscle sort of twitch that's happening. And then another possibility is electrolyte imbalances. So sometimes muscle cramping, but it can also manifest in the form of muscle twitching, can be caused by dehydration and the resulting sort of electrolyte imbalances. So if that's the case, you may want to, I would actually like track your food for, a few days and see if you're short on some of the key electrolytes, which include sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. A lot of people who have issues with muscle cramping and twitching, if you find that those typically go hand in hand, do find that supplementing magnesium and potassium in particular, those two electrolytes are the most deficient. Most people are in fact deficient in both of those. Sodium is very rarely deficient unless you're on a low salt diet on purpose or you're eating a very restricted diet. Most Americans, in fact, consume too much sodium, which is why a lot of people are hypertensive. But a lot of people do find that magnesium supplementation works really well. We talked about on a previous podcast, my new favorite form of magnesium is magnesium acetyl taurate, which is available by Doublewood Supplements on Amazon. It has the best bioavailability in terms of crossing the blood-brain barrier. Now, interestingly, that's really for more psychological purposes, right? Like the alleviation of anxiety or to help sleep, magnesium acetyl taurate is probably the best. Now, if you're talking about bodily twitches, then actually a magnesium glycinate, in terms of its penetration into skeletal muscle, or a magnesium citrate, if it doesn't cause you too much GI issues, would probably be superior. So something that's really cheap and easy to try, obviously consult with your doctor, I'm not providing medical advice, is if they approve 200 milligrams of a magnesium glycinate. There's common brands like Doctor's Best on Amazon. Very cheap, very bioavailable, will increase your magnesium levels and potentially could help with twitching and or muscle cramping. Magnesium affects like over 200 bodily processes anyway. It doesn't harm you to take it. It's pretty cheap and light on the pocketbook as well. That could potentially be helpful as well. But until you know what's really causing the twitching, I'm speculating at best, and so is anyone else. So what I would try to do is really try to figure out what's triggering it. And you may need to, go through a couple, trial and errors of different things to figure out what may be causing it and what may be alleviating it. But I mentioned a couple different potential causes. Work with your, care provider to figure out, follow up on some of those things and see what it may be.
Got it. Thanks again. Yeah, I think in my case, I definitely notice if I don't sleep well, if I have just around 4 to 5 hours of sleep in the morning, I could see the eye twitch. It's only eyes, nothing else. And if I had a good workout, lifting weights and other things, or doing lower body exercises maybe for the next couple of days, thighs twitch, all that. But it's interesting you mentioned about anxiety also is a factor for twitch as the output there. Yeah.
Yeah. Why are you only getting 4 to 5 hours of sleep, my friend?
Actually, there is. I did hear many times in this podcast to have a good amount of sleep, but there is other section of people who said 3.5 to 4.5 hours is more than enough, especially if you are into meditation and stuff like that. You don't sleep for 1/3 of your life like that, So I thought, okay, let's try it. And sometimes it's just naturally I had some other work to do and I could not sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. I've actually people have brought this up before, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of meditation. I literally did my college research at the Harvard Cognitive Neuroscience Lab with the Dalai Lama and some of his Tibetan Buddhist monks, including Mathieu Ricard, practiced Dzogchen meditation. I literally teach and practice a mindfulness-based therapy, so I am all in on mindfulness. However, that being said, meditation is not a substitute for sleep. And I actually, I've heard about people waking up early so they can get their meditation in. I actually think it's better to sleep in and get more sleep than to meditate. And I'm a big believer in the benefits of meditation, but it doesn't make up for it. I actually think that's a myth and actually a harmful notion for folks. There are other ways of saving time. Like I actually encourage people to do a walking meditation so you can get your daily steps in, practice open awareness, mindfulness, which does have, a lot of the benefits rather than sitting down doing eyes closed meditation. And so if you're absolutely squeezed for time, there's ways around it. But I don't think swapping it out for sleep is sufficient. There's also no evidence in general that like minimal amounts of sleep in the 3 to 4 hour range is really sufficient for anyone. There are some people, very rarely, that have a genetic condition that doesn't allow them to sleep very much, although we don't know what's really the long-term consequences of that is. But honestly, that probably applies to like 1 to 2% of people. Everyone else really needs 7 to 9 hours of sleep. The reality is obviously there's a lot of people who function with less than that, but they're not obviously functioning at their optimal. They're almost certainly using caffeine and other stimulants in order to get by and mask their sleep deprivation, or they're doing it for an acute period of time. Obviously, like if you just had a baby or something, you got to do what you got to do, but you're not going to do that for the rest of your life. That's obviously not going to be helpful. But it is really, really optimal to try to get your sleep back once you go through your kind of acute stress or your period of intense work or whatever it's causing it, to try to get back to that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I would venture to say, given what you're reporting, an eye twitch that's a result of sleep deprivation. Well, obviously the answer is like get more sleep, right? Don't need to be a clinician to say that, but it just shows like that that also suggests to me that that's evidence that you're not getting away with it, right? If it really was harmless, you probably wouldn't be developing symptoms. So, right, this is kind of your body's way of telling you, hey, man, like there's consequences to this. We do know that even one night of sleep deprivation on the order of sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night increases inflammation in the body. And so it may be manifesting, for instance, as a twitch that you notice in sort of your eye. So I really believe in actually listening to the body. That doesn't mean listening to it in terms of like how much French fries you crave, but listening to it in terms of when it's giving you symptoms, it's giving you pain, when it's giving you things that it's like, there's something wrong here. It's definitely worth listening to. And same thing, when your body's telling us it's tired, it's time to rest, we need to honor essentially the signal that that's telling us and catch up. So I think you got your work cut out for you in terms of getting back a little bit on catching up on sleep. And I'm pretty confident that if you do, you're going to start feeling better in terms of some of this symptomatic relief.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think when they say 7 to 9 hours of sleep, is that at one go? Is it like cumulative? Can you have a nap for 2 hours in the day and have sleep for 6 or 7 hours in the night, something like that?
Yeah, that is cumulative. Obviously, most people sleep those hours all in one go. You can do it through napping, but you have to be wary that your napping is not causing more sleep disruption. Generally speaking, most people can take a nap on the order of 20 to 45 minutes in the early afternoon, kind of the siesta time. Usually 7 hours after you wake up is the optimal nap time. So if you're waking up at, let's say, 8 in the morning, then 3 p.m. was probably the like low point or trough in your circadian rhythm. And then you can sleep for 20 to 45 minutes. If you sleep for more than that, the problem is you start getting into deep sleep. And when you start getting into deep sleep, it kind of alters your circadian rhythm, makes it hard to fall asleep later that night. So a lot of folks, you'll sleep an hour, 2 hours, etc. It's obviously very restorative. Your body needs it, but you're going to have a hard time going to sleep, and then you're sleep deprived, and then you need to take a nap again. And so you fall into this negative cycle of needing naps because you keep staying up late. That's the thing that you want to avoid. Now, there are some people who can do it without consequence, but those people are exceptions. I was actually listening to Paul Baxendale, who's Dorian Yates' training partner. Now, this is like one of the world's top bodybuilders, not a normal human being, on a lot of drugs, weighed 300 pounds. So take this with a huge grain of salt. He would sleep 8 hours a night, work out like a madman, and then take a 2-hour nap. This guy was sleeping 10 hours a night. and the 2 hours of sleep he was getting was not interfering with his ability to get 8 hours of sleep at night. But this guy was also training like the most maniacal person you've ever seen in your life, so he was probably exhausted every single day and needed the extra 2 hours of sleep because he's basically a professional athlete. That doesn't obviously apply to most people. So that's why I tell people try to keep it to 20 to 45 minutes and not within probably, 6 hours of going to bed. And that way it won't be disruptive. I generally don't think like biphasic sleep is probably optimal, despite internet, mythology around it. But look, you got to do what you got to do. If you have some weird work schedule, and that's the best way you can do it, I always think it's better to get more sleep total cumulatively, in any way that you can, rather than less sleep. If you literally add it up, like the extra hour that you get sneaking it in, whatever time, it's net beneficial to you. So I encourage people to obviously do it all at once, but more is always better. Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any other last questions?
Yeah, we had a question. Doesn't sleep play a role with cognitive function in terms of short-term memory and long-term memory?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, does sleep play a role in terms of cognitive function, especially as it pertains to short and long-term memory? Absolutely. Sleep is absolutely fundamental to cognitive function. There's numerous studies that show that both acute and chronic sleep deprivation impair cognitive performance. In fact, it's like the best way of like, if you want to study like cognitive impairment, other than in folks that have, unfortunately dementia, like if you want to show it in young people, all you have to do is deprive them of one night of sleep, stick them in front of a computer and have them do like some sort of short-term memory task, and you'll see, impairments. And then you can also test various things like caffeine and other agents that can improve working memory, short-term memory, etc. Acutely. And then same thing, if you have chronic sleep deprivation, it can impair your long-term memory because sleep is fundamental for memory consolidation. One of the functions that sleep serves, in addition to kind of, flushing out, some of the ill effects on the body and restoring your physiology, releasing hormones, building muscle, is it helps sort of consolidate and store memories. In fact, that's why there's a lot of studies that show that if you're a student or you're studying something, you want to study the information, get a good night's sleep, and then it helps essentially memory retention. So the analogy that I make is muscles aren't grown in the gym, they're actually grown in bed, right? You need to lift really hard in the gym in order to create the micro tears in the muscle, but when you go to bed, that's when they're rebuilt bigger and stronger. Same thing for studying and memory. You want to study your information, you want to work and learn something new at work, but you need to go to sleep and have deep quality, sufficient quantity of sleep in order to consolidate those memories so that you remember whatever it is that you learned in the long term. So it's absolutely critical. And I don't think there's honestly a more important, at least foundational psychological intervention when it comes to improving your memory than sleep. That's why I actually always say nootropics or smart drugs are overrated. Even though there is literature obviously on cognitive enhancing effects of caffeine, it also comes with a host of other problems in that generally, like I said, it's used as a mask for sleep deprivation. So even though it does make you more alert, and being more alert obviously lets you do tasks better, if it's messing with your sleep and if you consume too much caffeine, especially in the afternoon, it can definitely interfere with your ability to fall asleep and your sleep quality because it's a stimulant. If you really think about it, caffeine is a insecticide. It's literally grown by plants to deter insects from eating them, and we as human beings decide we're going to roast these beans and consume it for fun. So we're literally consuming a bug toxin, if you will. That's why it's a little bit crazy, but it has been done for a long time, and there's no necessarily ill adverse effects if you consume it in moderate dosages. In fact, some of the plants that obviously contain it, including green tea, may have some beneficial compounds that come with the caffeine. So there's no harmful effect from caffeine in and of itself in moderate dosages, but the way that it's used, I argue, behaviorally, can be harmful in terms of masking chronic sleep deprivation. So definitely get enough sleep if you want to have good memory, and especially good memory for the long term in terms of your brain function. All right, I think that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on Maximus Live episode 56. We host this show every single Thursday from 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. I hope this was educational and informative, and you learned some very concrete tips in terms of improving your health, your well-being, and your hormone production. If you're interested in what we're doing as a company, check us out at maximustribe.com. As I mentioned, we have a safe and effective program that can double your testosterone levels. We hook you up with a licensed physician, do at-home lab testing, and provide you with prescription medications that can double your testosterone levels. In addition to improving your overall health, if you're interested in the coaching side as well, you can join our Discord, which is part of the program. It's at discord.maximustribe.com. That's where our online men's community is. We have over 1,000 men that are on there that are working on their health. We call it mutual improvement, and we always say that, if self-improvement was never meant to be done alone. You always benefit from social support, accountability, and some friendly competition if you're trying to work on your New Year's resolutions of hitting the gym regularly, taking care of yourself, getting more sleep, and all the other things that we talked about today. So check us out at discord.maximustribe.com. My name is Dr. Cam. It is a pleasure to chat with you today. You can find me on social media at Dr. Cam Maximus, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And if you have any questions that I didn't get to, feel free to ask them on the Discord. We'll also save them for next week. Victor keeps a little database of questions, and I try to answer them every single week. I'll catch you next Thursday at 6 o'clock. Be well, be happy, be healthy. Take care.